It's Friday, June 13th, 2025, and we are expecting widespread severe weather across the United States today, with a focus on the Great Plains and the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. The Storm Prediction Center has highlighted an enhanced risk up in central Montana and a slight risk extending all the way down from the northern high plains to the central plains. And then this is accompanied by a marginal extending most of that same area, but it reaches further down into the southern and central plains. And then we have a marginal over here in our Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. The main threats today are going to be wind and hail. As you can see, we have a large 15% slight risk of wind associated with our storms out here in the northern to central plains, with a hatched region up in central Montana in our enhanced risk. And then in our other slight risk areas, we have 5% marginal risk of wind. And then for our hail risk, we have a moderate 30% hatched risk of hail up there in our central Montana enhanced risk area. And then this is going to be also accompanied by a 15% slight risk, which extends down into that same northern and central plains area that we've been talking about. Last but not least, there's also a 5% slight risk of tornadoes in our central Montana enhanced risk area. And then this is accompanied by a 2% marginal risk of tornadoes, which extends down from our central Montana risk area all the way down to the high northern plains, ending in western Nebraska. Now, this weather pattern is expected to stick around for quite some time. As you can see, our day 2 outlook is in much of the same area. Our day 3 outlook is in much in the same area. And the Storm Prediction Center has actually gone ahead and issued a 15% day 4, a 15% day 5, and a 15% day 6. So this pattern is expected to bring severe weather to the United States for quite some time. Taking a peek at our convective allowing models, here's the HRRR. We can see that around lunchtime, we get our first hint of storms out here in our Montana risk area, with a couple of more discrete storms out here in front of our main storm cluster. And these are going to bring that threat for wind, hail, and possibly a tornado or two. Despite the overall weak low-level shear out here, any storms that are able to kind of connect to that point between our warm front, which is going to be extending down, on our cold front, that is going to be where vorticity and spin or shear in the atmosphere is going to kind of be maximized, and that could rotate those storms, helping to produce tornadoes. But mostly the risk is just going to be wind and large hail, as we are expecting to see some pretty favorable deep layer shear numbers, which means that these storms will definitely be able to spin and create those strong updrafts. But moving later into the afternoon, we get our greatest organization as these storms kind of reach that line and get closer to that line. But once they sort of pass over that warm front and enter into more stable air, we can kind of see signs of them falling apart a little bit. But even our more southerly storms along this line, we can see that as they reach that boundary and as that low level shear starts to kick in from the sunset, they start to rotate and possibly create that more wind and hail threat. Taking a peek just a tad bit more south on our HRRR also, we can see more storms are expected here along the high plains convergence zone, with very favorable southeasterly flow advecting a lot of that temperature and moisture, and also some of that instability in the atmosphere more northernly towards our main risk area and along the high plains convergence zone. So we can see a lot of broken storm coverage out here. That is because there's actually expected to be quite a bit of convective inhibition or capping along this region. However, the HRRR is expecting storms to still fire up in eastern Wyoming and even into western Nebraska and South Dakota. And actually, an area in northeastern Wyoming is kind of catching my eye a bit. That's an area where spin is expected to be increased. So any storms that are able to latch onto that boundary, sort of remain semi-discrete, could actually have a decent chance of producing a tornado along with all hazards of severe weather. And then a bowing segment of storms is expected to move into western Nebraska, bringing that mostly wind and even small hail threat. And up here where it kind of bends back on itself, and because we have that favorable southeasterly flow, and coupled with it kind of being on that warm frontal line, enhancing that spin, is definitely somewhere where we could see spin up tornadoes along this quasi-linear convective system. And this is going to push eastward into the night hours and continue to bring that mostly wind threat, less of a hail and tornado threat as the storm disorganizes and weakens. And we're not quite done yet. We're going to move down here into our southern plains area along our highlands convergence zone and our dry line that's actually going to build up here today. It's actually expected to be a pretty robust dry line, providing that forcing for those storms. And the HRRR is expecting a line of storms to develop down here in western Texas, and these are expected to push eastward and then kind of fall apart as we go into the night hours, with their greatest potential of producing that threat for wind, hail, and possibly even a tornado, although the risk is extremely, extremely low. Is going to be around the evening hours. So strong winds and the hail are definitely going to be the main risk for these storms out here. And then out here we can see in our Mississippi River Valley to Ohio River Valley risk area, we can see a lot of scattered storms. So any storm clusters that are able to kind of bunch together could definitely pose that threat for severe winds. Here is our upper air maps, and this really gives us a big clue into why what's going on is going on out there. We can see a big short wave dipping into the Ozarks region and providing that large scale forcing for our storms out here in the Mississippi River Valley to Ohio River Valley. And we can kind of see it's being pinched by a ridge or a high pressure system out here off the eastern coast of Florida. And that's going to kind of enhance flow up here, giving more upper level forcing for those storms. And along our main risk area today, we can see very favorable southwesterly flow around that region, giving us that large scale lift for storms. And this is also going to be pinched by a high pressure system or ridging down here, also enhancing that flow. And then behind our ridge, we see a lot of northwesterly flow, which is definitely going to be a sign of that mostly wind threat out there. Here is a weather sounding from our main risk area today. We can see that our photograph is going to be straight and elongated with not really any curving, which definitely signifies that more wind and hail threat. We see some veering in our winds, which is going to help to spin those updrafts. We notice we have very little surface SRH and low level shear, but we do notice that our bulk shear is going to be quite high, over 55, approaching 60 knots. So that's definitely going to help to spin those storms and produce those strong updrafts, which brings that threat for large hail. We notice good lapse rates approaching 8 Celsius per kilometer. And then we notice lower lowest cloud levels, which is going to be one of the reasons for that 5% slight risk of tornadoes today. We see that our Cape is going to be definitely more than enough for this region, eclipsing 2500 Cape. Our precipitable water isn't going to be super high either at 1.18 inches. And then our downdraft Cape is going to be 1200, which is also going to help produce that wind threat out there today. And then one last thing to mention at first glance, our low level shear and helicity numbers are quite low, but any storms that are able to get closer to that warm front and kind of latch onto it would see an environment where these numbers would definitely increase and be more conducive for that tornado threat.